MSNOW and a congressman, representative, basically trying to criticize Todd Blanche and the DOJ for prosecuting the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which was, which was caught basically this week in an indictment, which I'll read a little bit later, moving funds into white supremacist groups, into actual hate organizations affiliated with the KKK and other groups in an effort to try and make these groups bigger. So they divide the Republican Party and make them look bad. Here, take a look.
To understand why the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, is attacking my guest tonight, you need a little bit of a backstory. And the story starts 45 years ago, when a couple of Alabama lawyers founded an organization aimed at protecting the rights gained during the civil rights movement. They called their group the Southern Poverty Law Center, and through strategic lawsuits, including one over a horrific lynching in Alabama in 1981, the SPLC succeeded in financially breaking the modern Ku Klux Klan, even forcing the KKK to turn over its national headquarters. Now, in the decades since, the Southern Poverty Law Center has tracked hate groups around the country, sharing many of its findings with the FBI, until Trump's FBI Director Kash Patel ended that partnership just last year.
God.
And this week, Trump's Justice Department indicted the SPLC, accusing the organization of fraud. Now, the indictment alleges that the SPLC deceived its donors because money the organization paid to informants inside white supremacists and other hate groups was actually funding those hate groups. That was the argument, which I would note is an insane thing to argue.
It's an insane thing to do. And in reality, if you read the indictment, it is very specific. In order to get an indictment, it is a very, very hard process. You need to get a grand jury to indict you. And in this case, that grand jury was where this case took place, which I believe was in Alabama, which is, in general, it's not an easy thing to be able to do. And this indictment said that the organization misled donors. It was an indictment accusing of the organization of misleading donors and diverting extremism, diverting funds to individuals tied to extremist groups. Over $3 million worth of funds. It's an insane, it's a huge amount of money towards organizations associated with, the Ku Klux Klan and Aryan nations. And donors are never informed of this. And if you read the indictment, it goes into very specific details. And if MSNOW right now is accusing this indictment of being politically motivated or false, that's complete BS. This is a much smaller organization than others to go after. But if you look at the SPLC, this is real. The SPLC has turned into its own hate group. And the fact that MSNOW is trying to cover for them is very concerning.
Now, more importantly, here's how an actual lawyer, our friend, former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, sums it up. She said, quote, "The Justice Department wants us to believe that one of the nation's leading civil rights groups, the people who broke the Klan and continue to expose the white supremacist groups that crop up in its wake, is actually supporting racism and domestic terror."
It is.
That they're, in fact, responsible for whipping up the frenzy.
It is. They are. It's a fact now with this indictment. Again, everyone's innocent until proven guilty, but the DOJ has a 97% conviction rate. So it's not by a state government. It's by the federal government. It's a significantly larger threshold to get a real indictment here. And if you read it, it goes into very specific detail. You cannot refute those claims. It's very specific. It paints to very specific individuals. It's not a politically motivated act, because if it was to be politically motivated, they wouldn't have been able to either get the indictment, and even if they did, you would have read it and it would have been a clown show. Read the indictment for yourself. In the article below, I will list out a few points that the indictment made. It is shocking.
Now, if that sounds like a deeply warped, messed up stretch, well, Joyce is hardly alone among former federal prosecutors in thinking the case is likely to fall apart once it hits an actual courtroom.
Oh, my God.
But a legal victory may not be the point here. The acting attorney general, who is Donald Trump's former personal lawyer and desperately wants to be the long-term attorney general, the formal final one, he accused the SPLC of, quote, manufacturing racism to justify its existence.
Yeah.
And the White House is echoing that. The White House press secretary is now referring to the 2017 White Supremacist Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville as the Charlottesville hoax. That's what she's calling it. That rally, at which a counter-protester was killed and dozens more injured,
and the SPLC funded, actually, if you read the indictment, the SPLC literally funded and gave money to a member who was organizing that rally.
White supremacists were held criminally and civilly liable for violence. was apparently a false flag operation funded by the Southern Poverty Law Center or something like that. That's their argument. And our friends over at Fox News are saying the indictment shows that the real racists have always been the anti-racist black activists who invented racism as a way to go after white people. Okay, that's their argument. There you go. And if that is not far enough out on a crazy offensive limb for you, President Trump is now claiming that this indictment somehow proves what else? That the 2020 election was stolen, which is, of course, a big freaking hint as to what this actually might be about.
Again, I may differ about the 2020 election than other people. I do not believe it was stolen, but I do believe that it was rigged in the sense that the entire media was against Donald Trump, in the sense that these organizations tried to, present like the Charlottesville rally, which was used against Donald Trump in the 2020 election. So it was rigged. It was obviously rigged against him. It was unfairly moved, but I don't think there was ballot stuffing to a great extent. But it was very obviously rigged. This is one of the points that prove that. But again, I know I differ from many people on that point.
Congressman Dan Goldman is back with me to talk about all of this. Okay.
Dan Goldman.
My colleague Steve Bannon, who's brilliant and writes the Maddow blog, laid out the chain of thoughts Trump appears to be following to get from the SPLC indictment to the 2020 election this way. They're facing criminal allegations. They're progressive. Progressives opposed Trump in 2020. He lost that election, therefore, throughout the results. Is that their argument, I guess? Or what do you think this is all about?
Well, the other way I was thinking about it is that they are responsible, really, for undermining and exposing many white supremacist groups. Well, we know that January 6th and the riots were fomented, facilitated, and executed by white supremacist groups. So is it now that he's saying, well, because the Southern Poverty Law Center actually was, quote, feeding the frenzy, which I think is a great comment by Joyce, that they are responsible for the riot on January 6th and whatever happened thereafter? It's so insane, Jan.
It's not insane, because it would be insane to say that with no evidence. I would 100% agree with that. But you are looking at an indictment that goes into grave detail of the exact employees, of the exact leaders of these of these organizations that were anti-right, that were anti-racist, that somehow became the most racist in the world, that somehow were leading Ku Klux Klan organizations. When you go into the actual detail, it's not crazy at all. You have to read the indictment. I mean, it's like the right was right about everything.
And it's just insane. The only thing that rivals it is the absurdity of this indictment.
Acting U.S. Attorney General Todd Blanche, you overlapped with him at SDNY, and he picked a fight with you on social media about this criminal indictment. I have so many questions here. Like, is this who he's always been? What is going on here? What is that about?
No, I mean, that's and I'm not the only one who worked with him at the Southern District who is absolutely shocked and alarmed by what he has become as the leader of the Department of Justice. I worked with him for many years, had no inkling. I didn't even know what his political background was, because that was not something that was ever at issue. But he was a straightforward, straight-shooting prosecutor. And the notion that he, of all people, would be doling out these politicized orders, these such clearly partisan and evidence-less orders and investigations and indictments, is bewildering to...
Okay. It is one thing to say something is evidenceless, there's nothing behind it. It is another thing to say and give actual examples of where it's evidenceless and where there's no evidence behind it. This guy's just spewing. He's just yapping about how there's no evidence behind this. I highly doubt he even read the indictment for itself. You can't just call something politically motivated just because you want it to be politically motivated. It has to actually be politically motivated. That's why when the Trump cases, when Trump was being actually politically persecuted, when he was having BS trials put against him every other day, right, like me, for example, who called those politicized, gave actual examples for why they were politicized. We didn't just call them, we didn't just call them politicized just because we wanted them to be politicized.
Just about everybody who worked with him, but everybody I speak to is just alarmed and incredibly disappointed because he has really helped to take this Department of Justice into the sewer. And it's not going to end right after, it's not going to resurrect itself as soon as Donald Trump leaves. This is really destructive, and it will have lasting and permanent damage. And it is on Todd Blanche's shoulders.
Oh, my God.
And he desperately wants to be the Attorney General, so there is that. Congressman Dan Goldman, thank you as always.
Again, guys, subscribe down below. Leave your thoughts on what you think of the SPLC indictment. This was a crazy interview, though. I mean, I can't believe a congressman is going against is trying to say that, that this organization that is very obviously anti-American now, it was facilitating racism for itself and is trying to defend it. It's just horrible. Leave your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys for supporting.